Have you ever wondered what would happen if everything you know about wealth and poverty was completely wrong? What lurks behind the gilded walls of the super rich? Is it luxury or loneliness? What if I told you that the greatest lesson about happiness comes not from business books, but from the calloused hands of hard workers? Imagine a girl who had it all: mansions, private jets, unlimited credit cards. But in a paradox that goes against everything we believe, she discovered that true wealth lay precisely in what her money couldn't buy. Her journey begins where our curiosity about the rich usually ends, the moment she decides to trade comfort for the unknown. What did she encounter on the streets that changed her life forever? How did waiting tables transform her more than any MBA? And what happened when her make-believe world collided with stark reality? The answer will surprise you, and perhaps make you question everything you think about success, happiness, and the true value of life. Isabella lived in a world of crystal and gold, where every wish was granted before it was even formulated. Her mansion had rooms she never used, clothes she never wore, and friends who never truly knew her. Loneliness was her constant companion in the empty corridors of that modern palace, where the echo of her footsteps sounded like a reminder of the life she never lived. Her father, billionaire Eduardo Montenegro, was constantly traveling to close multi-million-dollar deals, leaving her with nannies and tutors since childhood. Birthday parties were disguised corporate events, with adults talking about stocks and mergers while she watched children playing outside through the window. The transformation began when she realized she didn't know the price of a loaf of bread, but she knew the value of every stock on the stock market. One rainy night, looking at family photos that looked like staged scenes, Isabella made the bravest decision of her life. She wanted to discover who she was beyond the Montenegro surname, beyond her billion-dollar inheritance, beyond the gilded world that suffocated her. Her journey to find meaning would begin where she'd least expected, on the streets she had always observed from afar. That Monday morning, Isabella woke with a clarity she'd never felt before. As her maids tidied the 50-square-meter room, she watched through the window as workers boarded crowded buses, each with their own destination and purpose. There was an energy in these ordinary people she'd never experienced at her formal dinners with board executives. She began her plan meticulously, as her father had taught her in business, but with a completely different objective. She took photos of simple clothes in thrift stores, wrote down rental prices in working-class neighborhoods, and studied public transportation routines. Her first lesson was learning how to write a resume, something she'd never needed before, and figuring out which skills were truly valuable in the mainstream job market. When she finally hefted an old backpack onto her back and left her unlimited credit card on the bed, her heart pounded, not with fear, but with anticipation. For the first time in her life, Isabella Montenegro was about to discover who she was without her famous surname, without her billion-dollar bank account, without the security of the world she had always known. Her greatest adventure began where money couldn't buy happiness. Isabella cut her blonde hair at a simple neighborhood salon, where women chatted about bills and children at school. The strands fell to the floor like reminders of the past she was leaving behind as she transformed into Bella, a young woman recently arrived from the small town. Hands that had never washed a dish now dyed her hair with cheap products that smelled of strong chemicals. She chose ill-fitting thrift store clothes, worn-out heels, and a bag with scuffs. In the mirror of her cheap boarding house bedroom, she saw a person she'd never imagined, eyes filled with determination mixed with fear, hands trembling slightly as she adjusted her simple blouse. Every detail of her disguise was calculated to go unnoticed in the real world she so desperately yearned to know. When she first stepped out as Belle, she felt a frightening freedom. No one greeted her with reverence. No one knew her last name. No one wanted anything from her. For the first time, Isabella was completely alone and completely free, ready to discover if she could survive without the safety net that had protected her since birth. The first shock came at the popular supermarket, where Isabella tried to buy food for the first time. The shelves full of unfamiliar products, the prices she had to calculate mentally, the endless lines of weary people. Everything was new and frightening. She watched a mother teach her daughter how to compare prices for beans, a lesson she had never learned in her private lessons. On the crowded bus, she learned about personal space the hard way. Sweaty bodies pressed against each other, bags bumped against her legs, and the smell of gasoline mixed with cheap perfume made her nauseous. An elderly woman offered her seat, thinking Isabella was sick, and she felt a deep shame for never having thought to do the same for someone else. When she finally arrived at the guest house, her hands aching from carrying heavy bags, Isabella looked at the tiny room and felt a loneliness unlike any she'd ever known. It wasn't the loneliness of the empty castle, but the loneliness of someone truly alone in the world. The first night was spent awake, listening to the sounds of the city and questioning every choice that had brought her there. Her first day as a waitress at Cantinho do Saber was a lesson in humility no business master could have taught her. Isabella stumbled with heavy trays, spilled coffee on impatient customers, and confused simple orders. Hands that once held Mont Blanc pens now trembled under the weight of hot dishes, while her feet ached in cheap shoes not designed for hours on her feet. Customers treated her with indifference or impatience, as if she were just another replaceable part of the restaurant. A wealthy man complained loudly about the slow service, unaware he was criticizing a billionaire heiress. Isabella swallowed her pride and apologized, feeling each word like a stab to the ego that had always been inflated by family status. At the end of her shift, when she counted the paltry tips she'd earned, not even enough to pay for one of her previous meals, something inside her began to shift. The value of honest work, of the sweat on her brow, of the exhaustion that comes from real effort, began to resonate in a way no corporate motivational speech could ever convey. Maria, the experienced cook, had been eyeing Isabella with suspicion since day one. There was something about the girl that didn't quite add up. Her hands were too soft for someone supposedly from the countryside, her accent too perfect, the way she held her cutlery as if she were at a formal dinner. "She's hiding something, that girl," she commented to the other employees, who began to form theories about her mysterious past. Carlos, the restaurant manager, noticed that Isabella made basic mistakes that anyone in the city would know how to avoid. She didn't know the bus stops, the prices of common items, and seemed surprised by everyday situations. However, he also saw an unusual determination in her eyes, a desire to learn that went beyond the need for a job. Coffee breaks became moments of silent observation, where Isabella listened to conversations about overdue bills, sick children, and postponed dreams. She tried to fit in, but her attempts felt hollow, like someone trying to imitate a life they'd never lived. The invisible barrier between her and her peers grew larger every day, fueled by untold secrets. Everything changed one busy Friday when Isabella dropped an entire tray of drinks on an important customer. While the man yelled and threatened to sue the restaurant, Maria appeared out of nowhere and took the blame, saying she had placed the glasses unsteadily. This gesture saved Isabella from immediate dismissal, creating a bond that words cannot explain. Over the next few days, Maria began teaching Isabella the tricks of the trade, how to carry 3 plates at once, how to deal with difficult customers, how to memorize complex orders. The lessons were accompanied by real-life stories, about raising 2 children alone, about sleepless nights when someone gets sick, about the courage to keep going, even when all seems lost. One afternoon, when Isabella arrived at work with her eyes puffy from crying in secret, Maria pulled her into the stockroom and simply hugged her, no questions asked. In that tight embrace, smelling of spices and honest sweat, Isabella felt for the first time what it was like to have a true friend, someone who cared about her, not her last name or bank account. Her first month's paycheck arrived, and Isabella was shocked to see how much it actually cost to live. Rent for the boarding house took up half her salary, food another significant portion, and transportation the rest. For the first time, she understood the anxiety she saw in her colleagues' eyes when they talked about the approaching end of the month. The night the boarding house owner knocked on her door demanding back rent, Isabella experienced the genuine fear of homelessness. Her hands trembled as she counted her meager cash, calculating how much she would need to borrow and how many days she would go without food. The world that had always seemed safe and predictable now revealed itself to be fragile and unforgiving. Lying on the hard bed, listening to the street noises and the cries of a baby in the apartment next door, Isabella wept silently. They weren't tears of self-pity, but of understanding. She finally understood why people struggled so much, why every penny mattered, why safety was a luxury few truly had. On a quiet Sunday, while helping Maria organize the kitchen, Isabella heard a familiar news report on the restaurant's TV. There was her father, Eduardo Montenegro, giving an interview about his latest billion-dollar acquisition. He spoke with that unshakable confidence she'd always admired, but now she saw something different. a coldness in his eyes she'd never noticed before. His colleagues commented on the aloof billionaire, theorizing about what his life would be like. "It must be sad to have everything and no one," Carlos said, unaware that the man's daughter was washing dishes beside him. Isabella felt a sharp pain in her chest as she heard the speculation about her own family, about the loneliness that truly existed behind the fortune. That night, he wrote a letter to his father for the first time since leaving home. The words came out garbled, full of conflicting emotions, longing mixed with anger, love mixed with disappointment. She didn't address the letter, knowing she couldn't send it without revealing her whereabouts. But she needed to put on paper everything she'd learned about real life. Temptation struck hard when Isabella caught a cold that turned into pneumonia. Lying in bed at the boarding house, feverish and alone, she stared at the switched-off cell phone she kept as her last connection to her old world. A simple phone call to the family doctor would solve everything. Expensive medication, special care, immediate comfort. Maria discovered her like this, trembling with fever, and without hesitation took her to her simple home, while her friend prepared homemade tea and made up the sofa bed for her. Isabella felt deeply ashamed for even considering returning to the easy world. This woman who barely had anything for herself was willing to share what little she had with a near stranger. The next morning, feeling better but still weak, Isabella helped Maria make her children's breakfast before school. The children hugged her spontaneously, calling her Aunt Bella as if she had always been part of the family. In that moment, she realized she had found something money could never buy, a place where she was loved for who she was, not for what she had. The true test of humility came when the restaurant received a harsh review from an influential food blogger. The review specifically criticized the service, mentioning unprepared waitresses in general terms. Isabella felt the weight of guilt, knowing that her initial mistakes had contributed to the negative review, which could have hurt everyone's business. Instead of defending herself or blaming others, she asked Carlos to provide extra training after hours. She spent hours practicing how to properly pour wine, describe the dishes on the menu, and anticipate the customer's needs. Her hands, which had previously trembled, now moved with precision. Her eyes, which had previously wandered, now observed every detail of the dining room. The transformation was noticed by everyone when, weeks later, the same blogger returned incognito and specifically praised the impeccable service of the brunette waitress. Carlos showed the review to the entire team, proud of Isabella's progress. She smiled discreetly, knowing that this praise was worth more than any newspaper headline about her father's business. Lucas was the quiet cook who always observed Isabella from afar, intrigued by the girl who seemed to have fallen into the restaurant from another planet. He noticed small details: her overly polite manner, her refined vocabulary, her erect posture even after hours of standing. But he also saw the genuine determination in her eyes, her eagerness to learn, and her kindness toward the most difficult customers. Their romance began with small gestures: a hot coffee left for her on the counter, a special dish prepared on her most tiring days, a discreet smile when their eyes met during the rush of work. Lucas never asked questions about her past, accepting Bela exactly as she was, with her mysteries and silences. Their first date was at a street movie theater where the seats were uncomfortable and the sound occasionally stuttered. Isabella laughed more that night than she had at all the formal dinners in her life before. Holding Lucas's rough hand, he felt a true connection no expensive dinner or lavish gift could provide. The closer Isabella grew to Lucas and Maria, the heavier the secret she carried became. In intimate conversations, she had to make up stories about a childhood in the countryside she'd never experienced, about teacher parents who never existed, about an ordinary life full of little details she didn't know. Each lie stung like a knife, especially when she saw the genuine trust in their eyes. Tensions rose when Lucas invited her to meet his family on Sunday. His mother, Marta, prepared a simple but loving lunch, and everyone treated her like family from the very first moment. Isabella felt like an imposter, receiving so much affection based on a false identity, while her real family was miles away in their world of luxury. That night, looking at the photos Lucas had taken at the family lunch, Isabella cried in the guest house bathroom. She loved that simple life, those genuine people, that selfless love, but it was all built on a lie. For the first time, she seriously questioned whether it was worth continuing the disguise, even knowing the truth could destroy everything she had built. The crisis arrived on a busy Friday when an arrogant client began publicly humiliating Maria for a minor error in her order. He shouted that people of that level shouldn't work with the public, using words that cut deeply. Isabella watched the scene with her heart racing, watching her friend shrink under the insults. Something inside her snapped, putting aside her fear of attracting attention. Isabella faced the man with a firmness that surprised everyone. "No one deserves to be treated like this, regardless of the mistake they made," she said, with a natural authority that came from years of watching her father handle difficult situations. The customer was so surprised that he immediately fell silent. Carlos, who was about to intervene, was impressed by Isabella's poise. Later, he called her aside for a private conversation. "Who are you really, Bella?" he asked, realizing that this ordinary waitress possessed a presence and eloquence that belied her story. Her disguise was beginning to crack under the pressure of circumstances. The conversation with Carlos was the push Isabella needed. She couldn't keep lying to people who had become so important in her life. That night, sitting in Maria's kitchen drinking tea, she decided she would tell the truth, first to her closest friend, then to Lucas. The fear of losing them was less than the weight of the constant lie. She mentally prepared herself for the reaction that would come, imagining every possible scenario: anger, disappointment, betrayal. She reread the letter she had written to her father months earlier and realized the words still made sense. She didn't regret the journey, only the way she had begun it. The truth needed to be told, not as an excuse, but as part of her growth. When Maria arrived, exhausted from work, Isabella greeted her with trembling hands and a pounding heart. "I need to tell you something," she began, looking into the eyes of her friend who had become her sister. The next words would be the hardest of her life, but also the most necessary to move forward with authenticity. Before Isabella could tell her story, fate intervened dramatically. An investigative journalist reporting on Eduardo Montenegro recognized her at the restaurant. The camera panned to her surprised face as the reporter announced live, "We found the missing Montenegro heiress working as a waitress." Chaos instantly descended on the small restaurant. Colleagues stopped what they were doing. Customers whispered to each other, and Maria and Lucas stood frozen, staring at Isabella with expressions of utter disbelief. The mask she had so carefully protected had been brutally ripped off, without a chance for explanation or preparation. Isabella felt her world crumble around her. Maria's eyes, once full of affection, now showed confusion and betrayal. Lucas recoiled as if struck. In seconds, everything she had worked so hard to build crumbled under the cruel glare of the spotlight she had always tried to avoid. In the minutes following the revelation, the restaurant transformed into a circus of curiosity and shock. Customers took pictures with their cell phones. Colleagues moved away as if she had a contagious disease, and a heavy silence replaced the usual noise of the establishment. Isabella felt naked under everyone's gaze, exposed in a way she never imagined possible. Maria was the first to break the ice, but not with words of understanding. "Was it all a lie?" she asked, her voice trembling, her eyes brimming with tears. "Our friendship, our conversations, everything we shared. Was it just a game to you?" Each word hurt more than the last, confirming Isabella's worst fears about how the truth would be received. Lucas simply turned away and went back to the kitchen, which hurt more than any yelling. Carlos, pale and confused, politely asked Isabella to go home while he decided what to do. She left the restaurant to the flashing lights, feeling like she was leaving behind not just a job, but the life she had loved so much. The news reached Eduardo Montenegro before Isabella could even call him. His private jet landed in the city 2 hours later, and he went straight to the boarding house where his daughter was hiding. The scene was tense, the impeccably dressed billionaire standing in the tiny room, staring at the daughter he hadn't seen in months. "What were you thinking, Isabella?" he asked with a mixture of anger and concern. "Playing at being poor while the whole world mocks us? Our company lost millions in stock today because of your theatrics." His words focused on business, losses, public image. Everything Isabella already knew would matter to him. For the first time in her life, Isabella faced her father without fear. "It wasn't an act, Dad. It was the only real thing I've ever done," she replied, with a firmness that surprised them both. "I learned more about life in those months than in all my years of expensive education, and I learned that money can't buy what truly matters." The distance between their two worlds had never seemed so great. Eduardo Montenegro looked at his daughter and, for the first time, saw not the spoiled girl he had always protected, but a strong woman who had faced the world alone. Her words resonated with something deep within him, memories of his own humble childhood, the struggle to build an empire, the values he had perhaps lost along the way. His wounded pride began to give way to quiet admiration. "Tell me," he finally asked, sitting down on the simple bed. "Tell me about these people who were so important to you." Isabella talked for hours, about Maria and her boundless generosity, about Lucas and his simple love, about Carlos and his teacherly patience, about everyone who accepted her without knowing who she was. Each story was a stab in the heart of the man who had always believed that money solved everything. When Isabella showed him the bills she had to pay with her waitressing salary, when she explained the value of every hard-earned penny, when she described the solidarity among people who barely had anything for themselves, Eduardo began to cry. They were the tears of a man rediscovering his own humanity through the eyes of the daughter who had become wiser than he. With her father willing to listen and understand, Isabella faced the most difficult decision of all. Eduardo offered to bring Maria and Lucas to work at his company with sky-high salaries, buy her a luxurious apartment in the city, and transform the whole experience into a fairy tale with a guaranteed happy ending. It was the easy solution, a return to the comfortable world she had always known. But Isabella knew she couldn't accept it. "I don't want to buy your friendships, Dad," she explained clearly. "I want to earn them, and I don't want to live in a luxury apartment. I want to stay in my simple little room until I can afford something better with my own work." The rejection of the easy path surprised even her. Lucas and Maria were still hurt and distant, refusing to answer her calls. Isabella understood that regaining their trust would require more than words. It would require consistent actions, time, and the courage to face the consequences of her choices. She would need to prove that the person they knew as Bella was more real than the Montenegro heiress. Isabella turned down the luxurious apartment her father offered, but accepted a different proposal, a modest loan to start her own business, with the condition that she repay every penny with fair interest. She chose a simple space near the restaurant where she had worked, determined to create something that would benefit the entire community that had welcomed her when she was simply Bella. The project grew out of conversations with Maria about the challenges working mothers faced, balancing work and family. Isabella created a multi-purpose space that would function as a coffee shop during the day and a community support center at night, offering free classes for children, career coaching for adults, and a child care sharing system among neighborhood families. Eduardo, initially skeptical about the project's financial return, was impressed by the detailed business plan his daughter presented. He saw in her not just the girl he had raised, but an entrepreneur with a social vision he had never imagined possible. For the first time, he offered help not out of paternal obligation, but out of genuine professional interest. The opening of Spazio Bella was a simple affair, devoid of the pomp that typically accompanied the Montenegro family's businesses. Isabella invited all her former restaurant colleagues, the boarding house neighbors, and people she had met along her journey. Many came out of curiosity, others out of residual loyalty, and some to see if the heiress playing poor would take the project seriously. The first few days were intense learning experiences. Isabella worked as a waitress, administrator, cleaner, and volunteer teacher, applying everything she'd learned about hard work and practical management. Her hands, which once trembled when handling trays, now moved with confidence. Her mind, which had previously only calculated corporate profits, now solved real problems for real people. Lucas showed up on the third day, bringing a pie he'd baked especially for the inauguration. "I thought you'd given up on us," he said, watching the hustle and bustle of the place. Isabella smiled, knowing this was only the first bridge to be rebuilt. The project wasn't just a business. It was her way of showing the world who she had truly become. Maria was the hardest to win back. She visited Spazio Bella in silence, observing every detail with suspicion. "It's easy to be generous when you have billions," she commented dryly when Isabella approached her. The wound of disappointment was still open and bleeding, fueled by years of distrust of the rich, who had always treated people like her with indifference. Isabella didn't try to defend herself with words. Instead, she offered Maria a real partnership in the business, not as an employee, but as a partner with a share in the profits and decision-making power. "I need you not out of pity, but because you know this community better than I do," she explained, showing the detailed plans they had made together months earlier when they were still Bella and Maria. The turning point came when a desperate mother arrived at the center with a sick child, unable to afford a doctor. Maria automatically took charge of the situation, while Isabella called contacts who could help. Working together as before, they saved the child. In that moment, looking at each other across the waiting table, their friendship was reborn, stronger than ever. The success of Espacio Bella attracted media attention, but this time for different reasons. Newspapers spoke of the heiress who chose to serve rather than be served, and the project began to inspire other wealthy young people to create genuine social initiatives. Eduardo Montenegro, previously preoccupied with the scandal, now publicly boasted of his daughter in interviews. The greatest transformation came when Eduardo began applying the lessons learned from Isabella to his own businesses. He created training programs for low-income employees, implemented genuine inclusion policies, and began to value human labor differently. The Montenegro Empire began to change from the inside out, influenced by his youngest daughter's journey. Isabella declined offers of national expansion, preferring to focus on deepening her work in the community that had welcomed her. She understood that true legacy lay not in scale, but in the real impact on people's lives. Espacio Bella became not just a business, but a symbol that it was possible to combine financial success with genuine social transformation. A year after the opening of Espacio Bella, Isabella hosted a simple celebration there. In attendance were Maria as managing partner, Lucas as culinary workshop coordinator, Carlos as consultant, and all the people who had been part of her transformation. Eduardo Montenegro arrived discreetly, sitting among the neighborhood residents like a regular guest. When Isabella took the floor to speak, she didn't use prepared speeches or corporate jargon. She simply told her story, not as a princess who discovered poverty, but as a person who found her humanity through service to others. "I learned that wealth is not what we have, but what we share," she said, looking at every face in the room. The real lesson came when an 8-year-old girl attending the free classes gave Isabella a drawing. It showed 2 girls holding hands, one in a princess dress, the other in simple clothing. Under the caption, "We are all queens." Isabella then understood that she had created something greater than herself, a space where social differences didn't matter, only shared humanity. So what does this story awaken in you? Have you also been living in a bubble, not of wealth, but of routine, fear, and conformity? How many opportunities for growth have you missed because you believe you already know how the world works? Isabella showed us that true courage lies not in having everything, but in being willing to lose everything to find who we truly are. What would you do if you had the chance to start over without the shackles of your past? What masks do you wear in your daily life that prevent people from seeing your true essence? And most importantly, what legacy do you want to leave? Not on your bank statement, but in the hearts of those you meet. Isabella's transformation isn't about material wealth, but about the wealth that resides in every authentic choice we make. If this story touched something deep inside you, made you question your own assumptions, or simply inspired a smile of hope, then you've already begun your own journey of transformation. Want to continue discovering stories that challenge convention and celebrate the beauty of genuine humanity? Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications, because the next story might be just the one you need to take the first step toward your most authentic self.